The flames consumed the Anderson house at 3:47 a.m. on October 12, 2023, turning the quiet suburban home in Riverside, California, into an inferno that could be seen from 3 miles away. Inside the burning structure, fire investigators would discover 3 bodies arranged in a deliberate pattern that would shock even seasoned arson investigators. The victims had been positioned to recreate a biblical scene of judgment, with each body bearing evidence of ritualistic violence that preceded the fire. What made this case particularly disturbing was not just the methodical nature of the murders, but the handwritten note found pinned to the front door, quoting Leviticus 20:10 in neat block letters. If a man commits adultery with another man's wife, both the adulterer and the adulteress are to be put to death. The note was signed "The Hand of God" and dated 3 days before the fire occurred. The 3 victims were identified as 38-year-old Rachel Anderson, her 13-year-old neighbor Brandon Mills, and Rachel's husband, 42-year-old David Anderson. Initial examination of the crime scene revealed that all 3 had been killed before the fire started, and their bodies had been arranged in a triangle formation in the living room, surrounded by religious texts and biblical passages written on the walls in what appeared to be blood. The case would expose a web of inappropriate relationships, religious fanaticism, and vigilante justice that had been building for months in the seemingly peaceful neighborhood of Willow Creek. The perpetrator had documented every step of their plan in meticulous detail, creating a trail of evidence that would lead investigators into the darkest corners of suburban America. What the fire department didn't know as they battled the blaze was that the killer was still in the neighborhood, watching from across the street, believing they had carried out God's will by purging the community of what they saw as moral corruption. The case would become one of the most disturbing examples of religious extremism and vigilante justice in California's criminal history. Creek was a middle-class subdivision in Riverside, California, built in the 1990s when the area was experiencing rapid growth. The neighborhood featured identical ranch-style houses with manicured lawns and 2-car garages, home to families who had moved to the area seeking affordable housing and good schools. The community was known for its active homeowners association and annual block parties that brought neighbors together. The Anderson family had lived at 1247 Maple Drive for 8 years. David Anderson worked as an insurance adjuster and was known for his meticulous attention to detail and strict adherence to rules and regulations. Rachel Anderson was a part-time substitute teacher who had struggled with depression and anxiety, following 2 miscarriages that had left the couple unable to have children. Their marriage had become increasingly strained over the past 2 years. Living 3 houses down at 1253 Maple Drive was the Mills family. Brandon Mills was a 7th grader at Riverside Middle School, known for his academic excellence and quiet demeanor. His parents, Jennifer and Michael Mills, both worked full-time jobs that required frequent business travel, leaving Brandon home alone or with various babysitters most afternoons and evenings. The neighborhood was also home to Eleanor Vance, a 67-year-old retired school principal who lived directly across the street from the Andersons. Eleanor had been widowed for 5 years and had become increasingly involved in her local church, developing fundamentalist religious beliefs that often put her at odds with her more liberal neighbors. She maintained detailed observations of neighborhood activities and was known for her judgmental attitude toward what she perceived as moral failings. The fire at 1247 Maple Drive began in the early morning hours of October 12, 2023. The first 911 call came from Eleanor Vance at 3:52 a.m., reporting flames visible through the Anderson house windows. Fire department records show that multiple accelerants had been used throughout the house, causing the fire to spread rapidly and burn with unusual intensity. When firefighters arrived at 4:03 a.m., the house was fully engulfed in flames. The fire had burned so hot that the roof had already collapsed, making immediate entry impossible. Neighbors reported hearing no screams or calls for help, leading fire investigators to suspect that the occupants had been incapacitated before the fire started. The fire was brought under control by 5:30 a.m., but the damage was extensive. The entire interior of the house had been destroyed, and the walls were barely standing. Fire Marshal Patricia Rodriguez immediately suspected arson based on the burn patterns and the speed at which the fire had consumed the structure. The presence of multiple points of origin confirmed that accelerants had been used deliberately. As the scene cooled, investigators discovered the first body in what had been the living room. The victim was found in a kneeling position, hands bound behind the back with zip ties. 2 additional bodies were found nearby, also bound and positioned in specific poses. The arrangement of the bodies formed a triangle with religious texts and biblical passages visible on the partially burned walls. The note pinned to the front door had been protected from the flames by a metal backing, preserving the biblical quote and signature. The handwriting was neat and deliberate, suggesting the killer had taken time to prepare the message carefully. The paper showed no signs of haste or emotional disturbance, indicating a methodical approach to the crime. Fire investigators found evidence of multiple accelerants used throughout the house, including gasoline, lighter fluid, and what appeared to be homemade napalm. The accelerants had been applied in a pattern designed to ensure complete destruction of the interior, while leaving the exterior walls partially intact. This suggested the killer had knowledge of fire behavior and destruction techniques. The positioning of the bodies and the religious symbolism at the scene indicated that the murders had been planned and executed as a form of ritualistic punishment. Each victim had been bound in a different manner, suggesting the killer had assigned specific roles or meanings to each death. The biblical passages written on the walls were all related to adultery, fornication, and divine judgment. Investigation of the immediate area revealed that the killer had used the Anderson family's own garden shed to store supplies and plan the attack. The shed contained empty containers that had held accelerants, zip ties matching those used to bind the victims, and a notebook containing detailed plans for the murders. The notebook included floor plans of the Anderson house, schedules of the family's daily activities, and biblical passages justifying the planned killings. The crime scene also revealed that the killer had been inside the house for an extended period before starting the fire. Evidence showed that the murders had occurred over several hours, with each victim killed separately and then arranged in their final positions. The killer had taken time to write the biblical passages on the walls, and to ensure that the religious symbolism was properly displayed, physical evidence at the scene included footprints in the backyard that matched a specific brand of hiking boots, tire tracks in the alley behind the house, and DNA evidence on the zip ties used to bind the victims. The killer had made efforts to avoid leaving evidence, but had not been entirely successful in covering their tracks. Detective Harper Quinn arrived at the scene at 6:15 a.m. and immediately recognized the ritualistic nature of the murders. The positioning of the bodies, the biblical passages, and the methodical destruction of the house suggested a killer with strong religious motivations and significant planning capabilities. Detective Quinn ordered a complete forensic examination of the scene and began interviewing neighbors to establish a timeline of events. The first major breakthrough came when investigators found Rachel Anderson's diary hidden in the trunk of her car, which had been parked in the driveway and survived the fire. The diary contained detailed entries about an inappropriate relationship with Brandon Mills that had been ongoing for 3 months. The entries described sexual encounters and emotional manipulation that constituted statutory rape and child abuse. The diary revealed that Rachel had been struggling with depression and had become fixated on Brandon Mills, who reminded her of her deceased younger brother. She had begun grooming the boy through homework help and emotional support, gradually escalating to sexual contact. The relationship had become increasingly complex, with Rachel alternating between guilt and justification for her actions. Detective Quinn discovered that David Anderson had found his wife's diary 2 weeks before the murders. Bank records showed that David had withdrawn $500 in cash on September 28th. The same day, Rachel's diary indicated he had confronted her about the relationship. The diary's final entry, dated October 1st, described David's threats to expose Rachel and his demands that she end the relationship immediately. The investigation revealed that Eleanor Vance had been documenting the Anderson family's activities for months, keeping detailed logs of visitors, unusual behavior, and what she perceived as moral infractions. Her notebooks contained observations about Rachel's frequent interactions with Brandon Mills, including times when the boy visited the Anderson house while David was at work. Forensic analysis of the zip ties used to bind the victims revealed DNA evidence that matched Eleanor Vance. The hiking boot prints found in the backyard were consistent with boots found in Eleanor's closet, and the tire tracks matched her 2019 Honda Civic. Detective Quinn obtained a search warrant for Eleanor's house and discovered extensive evidence of her involvement in the murders. Eleanor's home contained detailed planning documents for the murders, including floor plans of the Anderson house, schedules of the family's daily activities, and lists of supplies needed for the attack. She had been preparing for the murders for over a month, gathering intelligence and acquiring the materials needed to carry out her plan. The investigation also revealed that Eleanor had been in contact with extremist religious groups online, sharing her observations about the Anderson family and seeking validation for her planned actions. She had posted in forums dedicated to biblical justice and had received encouragement from other members who shared her fundamentalist beliefs. Detective Quinn found evidence that Eleanor had been conducting surveillance on the Anderson house for weeks, using binoculars to monitor the family's activities and documenting Rachel's relationship with Brandon Mills. She had taken photographs of the boy entering and leaving the Anderson house and had compiled a detailed dossier of evidence to support her belief that divine intervention was necessary. Investigation revealed that Eleanor had planned the murders to coincide with what she believed was a significant religious date, timing the attack to occur during the Jewish Day of Atonement. She had spent weeks studying biblical passages related to adultery and divine judgment, preparing the religious symbolism that would be displayed at the crime scene. Phone records showed that Eleanor had been monitoring the Anderson family's communications, using surveillance equipment to intercept their phone calls and text messages. She had learned about David's discovery of Rachel's diary and had used this information to plan the timing of her attack. The evidence showed that Eleanor had killed David Anderson first, surprising him when he returned home from work on October 11th. She had then waited for Rachel and Brandon to arrive for one of their scheduled meetings, killing them both before arranging all three bodies in the ritualistic formation. The murders had been carried out over a period of 6 hours, with Eleanor taking time to write the biblical passages and prepare the accelerants. The investigation took an unexpected turn when Detective Quinn discovered that Eleanor Vance had not acted alone. Digital forensics experts analyzing Eleanor's computer found encrypted communications with a network of religious extremists who had been planning similar attacks in other communities. The group, calling themselves the Sword of Righteousness, had been operating for 2 years and had been linked to at least 12 other vigilante killings across the western United States. The encrypted messages revealed that Eleanor had been recruited by the group after she began posting about the Anderson family situation in online forums. The group's leaders had provided her with detailed instructions for carrying out the murders, including specific methods for binding the victims and arranging the crime scene. Eleanor had been following a playbook that had been used in previous attacks. Further investigation revealed that Brandon Mills had not been a victim of Rachel Anderson's abuse, but had actually been working with Eleanor Vance to gather evidence against Rachel. The boy had been recording his interactions with Rachel using a hidden camera provided by Eleanor, and had been following Eleanor's instructions to encourage Rachel's inappropriate behavior in order to document it for potential prosecution. The shocking truth was that Brandon Mills was Eleanor's great-nephew, and Eleanor had been using him as an undercover operative to expose what she believed was widespread moral corruption in the neighborhood. Eleanor had convinced the boy that he was helping to protect other children by gathering evidence against adult predators, and Brandon had been willingly participating in the scheme. Digital evidence showed that Eleanor had been coordinating with other members of the Sword of Righteousness to identify and target individuals they believed were engaging in immoral behavior. The group had developed a sophisticated network of informants and surveillance operations, with members in dozens of communities across the country. The investigation revealed that Eleanor had been planning to kill Brandon Mills as well, despite his cooperation with her plan. Her communications with the extremist group showed that she believed Brandon had been corrupted by his exposure to Rachel's advances and needed to be cleansed along with the adult participants. Brandon's death was intended to serve as a warning to other children about the consequences of immoral behavior. Detective Quinn discovered that Eleanor had been planning additional murders beyond the Anderson family. Her notebooks contained detailed plans for killing other neighbors she suspected of adultery, homosexuality, and other behaviors she considered sinful. The list included 15 potential victims, with complete surveillance files and attack plans for each target. The investigation also revealed that David Anderson had been trying to protect his wife and had planned to help her seek professional help for her inappropriate relationship with Brandon Mills. Contrary to initial assumptions, David had not been planning to expose Rachel publicly, but had been working to get her psychological treatment and to ensure Brandon's safety. Perhaps most shocking was the discovery that Eleanor Vance had been embezzling money from her church to fund her vigilante activities. She had stolen over $50,000 from the church's building fund and had used the money to purchase surveillance equipment, weapons, and supplies for her planned attacks. The church's financial records showed systematic theft dating back 18 months. The investigation revealed that Eleanor had been receiving detailed instructions from the extremist group's leadership, including specific biblical passages to use at crime scenes and methods for avoiding detection by law enforcement. The group had been providing financial support and tactical guidance to members carrying out vigilante killings across the country. Eleanor Vance was arrested on October 18, 2023, and charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder, arson, conspiracy to commit murder, and child endangerment. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Michael Torres, sought the death penalty based on the premeditated nature of the murders and the use of religious extremism to justify the killings. The trial began on March 4, 2024, with Eleanor's defense attorney, Linda Rodriguez, arguing that her client was mentally ill and had been manipulated by the extremist religious group. Rodriguez presented expert testimony from psychiatrists who diagnosed Eleanor with delusional disorder and argued that her religious beliefs had become pathological obsessions that impaired her judgment. The prosecution countered with evidence of Eleanor's extensive planning and coordination with the extremist group, arguing that her actions were deliberate and calculated rather than the result of mental illness. District Attorney Torres presented the encrypted communications, surveillance equipment, and detailed planning documents found in Eleanor's home as evidence of her competence and criminal intent. The trial revealed the full scope of the Sword of Righteousness organization, with FBI testimony about the group's nationwide operations and links to other vigilante killings. The prosecution presented evidence that Eleanor had been a willing and active participant in the conspiracy, following the group's instructions precisely and reporting on her progress regularly. Brandon Mills testified as a key witness, describing how Eleanor had recruited him to gather evidence against Rachel Anderson. His testimony was particularly damaging to Eleanor's defense, as it showed that she had been manipulating a child to participate in her criminal activities. Brandon's emotional testimony about being used by Eleanor resonated strongly with the jury. The defense struggled to explain Eleanor's methodical planning in coordination with the extremist group. Expert witnesses testified about the psychology of religious extremism and how individuals can become radicalized through online communities. However, the prosecution successfully argued that Eleanor's actions were too organized and deliberate to be the result of mental illness alone. The trial lasted 8 weeks, with testimony from over 60 witnesses. The prosecution presented evidence of Eleanor's financial crimes, her surveillance activities, and her communications with the extremist group. They also presented forensic evidence linking Eleanor to the crime scene and establishing her presence at the Anderson house on the night of the murders. The jury deliberated for 16 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges. Eleanor was sentenced to death for the 3 murders, with additional sentences totaling 60 years for the other charges. The judge described Eleanor's actions as a calculated campaign of terror, disguised as religious righteousness, and noted that her use of a child in her criminal activities was particularly heinous. The trial also led to a federal investigation of the Sword of Righteousness organization, resulting in the arrest of 12 other members across 6 states. The FBI identified the group as a domestic terrorist organization and began monitoring similar extremist religious groups for potential violence. The case of Eleanor Vance and the Anderson family murders exposed the dangerous intersection of religious extremism, vigilante justice, and online radicalization. Eleanor's transformation from a respected, retired educator to a religious extremist willing to murder her neighbors demonstrated how individuals can be radicalized through online communities and manipulated into committing acts of violence. Investigation revealed that the Sword of Righteousness had been operating a nationwide network of vigilante killers, using religious justification to target individuals they perceived as morally corrupt. The case led to increased federal monitoring of extremist religious groups and new legislation targeting online radicalization and conspiracy to commit violence. The community of Willow Creek struggled to understand how one of their neighbors could have committed such horrific crimes. The revelation that Eleanor had been conducting surveillance on multiple families and planning additional murders shattered the neighborhood's sense of security and trust. Many residents moved away following the trial, and the community never fully recovered from the trauma. Brandon Mills received extensive psychological counseling and was relocated to live with relatives in another state. The manipulation he experienced at the hands of Eleanor Vance had lasting effects on his development and trust in adult authority figures. His testimony during the trial was credited with helping to secure Eleanor's conviction and expose the Andersons' extremist group's operations. The case raised important questions about the role of online communities in radicalizing individuals and the responsibility of internet platforms to monitor and prevent the spread of extremist content. It also highlighted the vulnerability of children to manipulation by adults who use religious or moral justifications for their actions. The story of Eleanor Vance serves as a warning about the dangers of religious extremism and the potential for ordinary people to become radicalized through online communities. It demonstrates how individuals can use religious beliefs to justify horrific acts of violence and how extremist groups can exploit personal grievances to recruit new members. The case remains one of the most disturbing examples of vigilante justice in recent American history. illustrating how the combination of religious fanaticism, online radicalization, and access to weapons can create deadly consequences for innocent victims and entire communities.